As a result of Trump's incitement of an insurrection at the nation's capital yesterday, it's been reported that multiple senior officials are actually having discussions about invoking the 25th Amendment that would allow the vice president to step in for the president if he is unable to do his job.
Democratic strategist, CEO of Pine Street Strategies, Don Calloway, and co-host of the Realignment podcast, Marshall Kosloff. They join us now to discuss. Great to see you guys. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you guys.
Yeah. Don, let me start with you. There's been a lot of discussion here, 25th Amendment, impeachment articles, I think already being drafted by several Democrats. President Trump put out a statement via a spokesman yesterday saying, there will be a peaceful transition of power on January 20th. So do you think that it's a symbolic thing and it does matter? Or is, trying to do all this in 13 days, is that just going to turn the temperature up even more in Washington? What do you think?
Well, I think that we have to be extraordinarily vigilant over the next 12 days. I mean, a tremendous amount of damage that is both unthinkable and irreversible can happen over the next 12 days. And I think that what we learned yesterday, or what some of us learned yesterday, what some of us have known for a long time, is that there's no depth to which this president would not seek, both to protect his seat and simply to throw away the republic. He has no loyalty to anyone but himself. And I think that he is speaking to a certain low education, low information, low vibration segment of America and segment of his voter base that is willing to execute on not only his orders, but how they feel based upon what he and his people have engendered over the last 4 years. This has nothing to do with him calling for an calling for a protest on January 6th. This has to do with what he has stood for ever since he came down that escalator 6-7 years ago now. So I think you almost have to invoke the 25th Amendment or some type of congressional action to impeach. But if not formal action, this calls for the continued conscientious objection from every level of government, military, cabinet members. They have to bind his hands regardless of what he asks to be done from now and through the January 20th.
Yeah. Marshall, I have a couple of thoughts here. First of all, there's no reason for us to believe he's going to stop, that this is it, that he's just going to, sure, he said last night, peaceful transition of power. How's that going anyway? But there's no reason we should expect he's going to be on good behavior. His past 4 years certainly don't indicate anything in that regard. And second of all, on a deeper level, look, one of the failures of this country has been an utter and complete lack of accountability for elites. What does that look like for Donald Trump? What does any sort of accountability for inflicting this national trauma on us look like?
Well, this is what's so interesting about you putting Trump in that category of elite, because what's different about Donald Trump from any other elite in our society is Trump has an actual constituency of actual people who, as we saw yesterday, desperately care and will effectively do and think anything to justify that support of him. So this isn't just like a situation where we can say, insert congressman or insert senator did a bad thing, or Wall Street executive or someone in a big corporation where they can be tossed to the side when they commit various acts because that's it. With Trump, you have to actually think about that. So we have to figure out something. What we basically have to figure out how to do is navigate the fact that with Donald Trump, we have a sunk cost. It is just not possible, if this country wants to keep moving forward, to just throw Trump away completely, in my opinion. You have to act fairly, and that does include the possibility of a Twitter ban, especially after his presidency is over. So I don't want to say there's no accountability. But if I'm thinking of the things that would be the worst thing for the country right now, it would probably be the Southern District of New York pursuing charges. It would be the Biden administration pursuing charges. That'd be exactly the wrong thing to do to amp up this situation.
Yeah, I tend to agree, Don. And we're not even talking about merits here. We're talking about, as we discovered yesterday, there is a large segment of the country which legitimately believes the election was stolen, and using the 25th Amendment or impeaching or any of these types of things would turn the temperature, I think, up to 20. That is how you get actual armed insurrection in other cities across the country. What do you think?
So I don't necessarily buy that these people genuinely believe that the election was stolen. I think that that's what they're saying. But here's what I think, to be honest. I think that these people think that the majority of, and this, I have been thinking through this in my head for a couple months. I've never articulated it, so it might not sound as polished as I would like for it. So please forgive me. I think that there is a huge segment of people, far more than those who are willing to take up arms like yesterday, who believe that since the majority of white people did not vote for Donald Trump, then that election is not valid. These are people seeking to throw out the votes of blacks, the votes of women, the votes of marginalized groups. And they say, hey, you know what? This country was made by and for white people, specifically white men. The majority of us did not elect Joe Biden. Therefore, his election is invalid. And I think that's the fundamental spirit of what we saw yesterday. Blacks voted for, Latinos, immigrants, first-generation Americans, brown folks, trans folks. That's who Biden represents. And that's not us. Therefore, his presidency was not valid. And it's no coincidence to me that this insurrection was on the immediate back of a black man and a Jewish man being elected to the United States Senate for the cradle of the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Those are not coincidences. I know the debate was planned, but I think that stoked the fire even more. And these folks are saying that this country is slipping away from a white male hegemony. And we are acting against that. It is an immediate, visceral backlash against that.
Marshall, let me just say, and I hear the concern of like, my God, like this country is on edge. It has been on edge for a year. People have been locked down. They're, struggling with addiction, with depression. Like we're turned at each other's throats because of a whole cascade of reasons. Everybody who profits and benefits from creating these and exacerbating these tribal divisions. And so I hear the concern about like, my God, if we actually removed him from office, what would that bring upon the nation? But I guess I'm a lot more fearful of what happens if this kind of action happens and it's just like another day in Washington and there is no ultimate accountability. There is no ultimate cost to pay. I mean, banned from Twitter, who cares, right? I remember back after the Bush administration, there was a debate about what are we going to do about these people who brought us into war, who lied us into war? And the decision was made like, nope, for the country's sake, we've got to move forward. That was a gigantic mistake. And yeah, in the short term, it helped to calm the tensions. In the long term, it has only helped to undermine the core institutions and trust in this country. I think there has to be some sort of reckoning for what this president has done here.
Yeah, a couple of things here. So one, I don't think the Iraq War example is particularly accurate, just in the sense that it's not quite clear what crime was actually committed there. Like the Iraq War was a disastrous, horrific decision, but we can't actually have a situation where if something goes wrong, like after the fact, we prosecute or put people in jail when there isn't like direct evidence.
Well, I would say that torture and lying to the American people and the war crimes that were committed were actual crimes, but go ahead.
Well, so once again, though, like that's okay. So then be more specific. So what you're talking about is like people who committed torture, maybe at this, but like that's different than saying George W. Bush after office should be pursued, which was what was implied by your statement. But moving on to the broader point about the 25th Amendment, the thing here is impeachment, 25th Amendment, these are no longer things that many people on the right especially just saw as grifter, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow positions. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's paying attention yesterday has to know, and the people at the White House certainly know, that this is no longer a jokey thing that can be pushed to the side. So when I was talking about avoiding retribution, I was not giving a blank check. What I'm more referring to is that until something happens, once again, we should not move any further, but this should 100% be kept on the docket. And then thirdly, I just want to respond to the point about whether or not people believe that this is an issue that is about the election being false. It's entirely true that there's a huge portion of this country, a minority, but a huge portion that believes this election was rigged and stolen. And that, frankly, is why yesterday's decision was such a disastrous decision. It was a terrible idea for Congress to legitimate, to continents, to even indulge and justify the belief that this wasn't a legitimate election. That's the problem here. Yeah. If this were actually people cosplaying, if people were just pretending to think it was fake, we wouldn't have seen what happened yesterday.
I will back that up, John, having to dealt with some. They really do believe it. But guys...
They may believe that, and
go ahead.
That's fine if they believe that, but I don't think that the people in charge, the people who are their leaders, the people who are giving obstruction believe that because
Oh,
they
of course. Oh,
Agree
yeah.
on that.
There's a lot of agreement here. What we were saying earlier in the show is they know that this is all bullshit.
And that they're lying to their own people. To Josh Hall, we're going to talk about them in the next segment. Like when they're cowering and fearing for their lives, like they knew they were lying to these people and they wanted to do it for their own political ambitions and for fundraising.
All right, guys, stick with us. We're going to be back with the panel and we're going to talk more about Hawley and Cruz right after this.